The Corvallis native in me is hoping that you feel welcomed by the rain that we're having today. We in Western Oregon have an affinity for these things, and we greatly need its blessing at this point. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk with you. I'm going to back off a little bit. I'm going to talk about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which comes through the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. And it is an ancient story, probably at least over 3,000 years old. It's a story that has a mythic structure about it. And what I want to do is to use this story within a context to show you how such stories can be an example of misuse and abuse, when really the message that they hold is a more important one for us. So, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah is at the root of this word, sodomy. Sodomy isn't a word that we hear much these days, but you see what it is. Down there at the bottom, sodomy is sexual intercourse, meaning anal intercourse or oral sex. Depending on which state you're in, it might also be defined as including bestiality, a human being having sex with an animal, or unnatural sex. Leave that up to your imagination. And sodomy becomes then the root of sodomy laws, or rather anti-sodomy laws. These are laws which prohibit the activities you see described here. They exist in every state in this nation, as well as in many nations in the world. And as you see by this description, they are by fact anti-homosexual laws, laws that prohibit what might be understood as sexual activity between persons of the same gender. Now, these laws, though they're still on the books, in a sense have been neutralized, in a sense, by Supreme Court decisions on a federal level in this nation. But there are still groups, especially who are working in the aftermath of the Supreme Court's decisions around marriage equity, that are pushing back, trying to make sure that these laws are not only observed, but reinforced and enforced vigorously. So this would be an example from a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom, who are trying to provide a rationale for why same-sex intercourse would be a health problem and therefore should be prohibited in the state of Texas. So, let me clarify what I mean by myth when I unpack this story for you. So, many of you are familiar with the Greek myths, the Roman myths, the Norse myths, Scandinavia. So we sometimes think of myths as something, a story that's not really true. But what they are timeless stories, the kinds of things that have never been factually true, but are in their own way always true, maybe capital T, in what that story teaches us about the ways of our human community. And so that's how I want to frame the context for this story today. So the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, it may be familiar to some of you. Before we even start the story, we need to acknowledge that part of the framing for it is, it seems to be common knowledge that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, these would be probably the most infamous twin cities that have never been discovered by archaeologists, that those people are deplorable and that their sin is so great, the outcry against them is so great that everybody knows about it. And this becomes one of those throwaway lines. You're walking along with a friend talking about the rain and the wind outside, and all of a sudden your friend says, and oh, by the way, the people of Sodom and Gomorrah are deplorable and their sin is great. So we've already heard that a couple of times before this story begins, right? The story begins, it's a story about Abraham and Sarah. So Abraham and Sarah are considered to be the first family of faith, so to speak, within the Abrahamic faith traditions, which includes Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They all trace their roots to this couple. And in our opening scene of the story, Abraham and Sarah are camped out at a place called the Oaks of Mamre. As they're having a nice quiet afternoon, a sunny afternoon, the story says, they are approached by 3 strangers. So, what do you do when a stranger comes into your life? In what was a fairly young faith tradition for them, they already know clearly that their response to the stranger is to provide hospitality, to provide welcome. And so they do. So here you see Abraham on the ground, in a sense, a position of servanthood, welcoming these 3 strangers. He doesn't know who they are. But he provides them with hospitality, which is what his faith tradition tells him he should provide. So you see him washing feet, again in a sense of servanthood. While this is going on, he lets his wife Sarah know we should be preparing a meal for these folks. So they join in fellowship around a table. In the meantime, in the background, Sarah is listening in on the conversations, and the conversation takes an interesting turn. Sarah and Abraham are in their 90s. They have been told for some time that they are going to be the parents of this great new nation of faith. But it seems like an empty and false promise, because at the age of 90 plus, she still has not borne a child. So one of the strangers says, well, when I return in due time, you will have a son. And Sarah, it says, is hiding behind the tent flap. And when she hears this, it's like, oh, that again. Ha! I think that's what she says. Says she laughs. You know, does she go, oh, tee-hee-hee, that's so cute? No, I think it's, ha! I've heard that. It hasn't happened yet. I have 1 foot in the grave and 1 foot in the maternity ward. I don't think that works either. And the stranger says, no, you will. I promise. And he said, and you laughed. And she said, I didn't laugh. Oh, yes, you did. Then the action turns, and the 3 strangers are communicating among themselves, because what's happening is, this is God and 2 angels of God who have come down because the cry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great that they had to come down and check it out for themselves. And what they're trying to figure out is whether they should let Abraham in on the deal, because if they do go to Sodom and discover that it is as deplorable as they understand it to be, they're going to destroy it. They decide, well, we've made Abraham this huge promise. We should probably let him in on what the plan is. So they tell Abraham, and Abraham has some skin in this game because his nephew Lot has just moved to Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay? So Abraham starts thinking, and he's like, he does the most unusual thing. He decides, oh, this is God I'm talking to. I'm going to bargain. So he says, well, what if there were 50 righteous people left in the community? Would you save the community for the sake of 50 people? God says, yep. Abraham goes on. He says, well, what about 40? What if there were 40 left? Would you save the community? Yep. and on it goes. I'm not there yet. Forget the Lego picture. And finally, he whittles it down to 10. If there are 10 righteous people left in the community, God promises to save the community. Okay, at that point, God and Abraham drop out, and two of the other strangers go on. So they shortly approach the gates of Sodom, and guess who, without benefit of a text message or anything, is waiting for them at the gates? Abraham's nephew, Lot. And Lot welcomes them. They are expecting to spend the night in the public square. He's kind of like, I don't think that's a good idea. Why don't you come enjoy my hospitality in my home? And they finally accept that hospitality. So they go to Lot's house, and he wines and dines them. He offers them the best hospitality he can afford. And as the night comes late and they're getting ready to sleep, all of a sudden there's a knock on the door. And what the story says, that outside the door is every man of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities. Now, the language in Hebrew is like every human being, actually. But this crowd, this immense crowd, is outside the door, and they are saying to Lot, "Send out those strangers that we might know them." Now, no, that sounds pretty innocent, doesn't it? No, it comes from the Hebrew yada, and yada is used like about 900 times in the Hebrew Bible. And most of the time, it means something like, God knew you from when you were formed in your mother's womb, or that someone knew you, that they saw you in a particularly clear way. And but about 9 or 10 times, it's a euphemism for having intercourse, that the man went into his wife and knew her. When I was in high school, we had a throwaway pickup line. "I'd like to get to know you in a biblical way," if you know what I mean. So Lot is like, he lets us in that he kind of understands what they mean, that they don't want to see these strangers more clearly. They want to do something else. And Lot responds by saying, "No, here, I have 2 daughters who are virgins. Why don't you take them and do whatever you want with them?" And the men outside say, "No. You are new to our community. You do not have the opportunity to provide hospitality to these strangers. So either do what we ask, or we will treat you even worse than we're planning to treat them." So what's on the table apparently is they're going to rape them. They're going to treat them like women, so to speak. They're going to subjugate them to make them inferior. This is what they would do with somebody who was captured as a prisoner of war. Anal rape, treat this man as a woman, humiliate them, degrade them, debase them. The strangers pull Lot back from the door. They shut the door. They cause everyone outside the door to be blinded, which kind of puts a lid on the problem for a while. And they say, "Lot, when day breaks, we are out of here with you and your family. So get as many of your family together as you can." He has sons-in-law, 2 of them, to go with the 2 daughters. They choose not to go with them, but by morning they leave. And as they leave, Lot's wife looks back at the calamity, the destruction that's already begun. And for looking back, she's turned into a pillar of salt. This is kind of those mythic story things. And the destruction proceeds full bore, fire and brimstone, literally a picture of hell. Now, this story, if Sodom and Gomorrah are so infamous, you'd think that their neighbors would know something about them. So if you go look elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible and see what the neighbors know about them, they know things like this. So we have Old Testament prophets who are neighbors in the sense of time, location, proximity. So Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Ezekiel, and later even Jesus, who specialize at calling out their community. They are heralds of righteousness, which biblically understood is justice. This is what they know about the real sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were shallow and vain and self-deceptive in their worship and their sacrifice. And they somehow confused themselves about that. They thought they were doing really well with that stuff. They were a representation of what we might call income inequality now. They had extreme wealth. It was the 99% and the 1%. And the folks on top, the 1%, didn't care. They didn't give a damn about the folks on the bottom. You see that next one, that they literally, in the language of one of the prophets, they oppressed and crushed the poor and the needy in their midst. So, and then here is the gold standard for what we might now call social justice. They did not advocate for the widow, the orphan, or the alien, the immigrant in their midst. These are people who in that community would have been voiceless, and they did not give them voice. When you get into the New Testament, Jesus in the Gospels, the thing that he says about Sodom and Gomorrah is he says they did not provide hospitality. And so when Jesus is sending out his disciples 2 by 2, he tells them to take nothing or to take very little so that the communities you go to will provide you with hospitality. And if they don't provide you with hospitality, shake the dust off your sandals as a judgment against them, because it will be even worse for them than it was for Sodom and Gomorrah. So this is a framework of context. And the question is, if that's what they know about Sodom and Gomorrah, what is it that's missing if we have laws that are called sodomy laws or anti-sodomy laws? They know nothing about what we call sodomy, and that was part of the offense of Sodom and Gomorrah. Nothing. What they were filled with was injustice in the social sense. So here you see from the medieval period the art showing God judging. I don't know if you can tell, but these apparently male characters are engaging in acts of sodomy. What I want to talk to you about is this sense of self-destructive communities. When Sodom and Gomorrah acts in the way that it does, that it commits these profound acts of injustice, does not welcome, does not include, does not advocate for, there's a sense in which communities that behave in those ways are self-destructive communities. Over the period of time, they do not survive because they have not welcomed the lifeblood of their community. So in this myth, you didn't even necessarily have to have God rain down hellfire on Sodom and Gomorrah, because they brought it on themselves through these actions or through their inaction. An example, this is a picture of the Westboro Baptist Church. You've heard about them. They're the ones that do the big protest things, the God Hates bags. They've been here on campus at least once. And it should not be a surprise to any of you that this is a community that's self-destructing. They are on a downward spiral and dying from within. The alternative would be communities like this, that where you live should not determine whether you live. The sense of communities that are open and welcoming, and especially in our culture in this day and age, welcoming to the immigrants, big issue for us. How do we welcome these people and their gifts into our communities? Should be the question that we live with. Cornel West helps us here. He says, to be human, you must bear witness to justice. Justice is what love looks like in public. All of the abiding faith or spiritual traditions of our world teach compassion. They teach compassion as a foundation for justice. They help to remind us of that constantly, but sometimes religions get twisted and turned so that they become just the opposite of what we're called to be. What I want to say is that the spirit of welcoming, the spirit of radical hospitality is one that we are invited to share, challenged to share, and it can come in so many ways. We've been celebrating Queer History Month here at OSU this month. Tomorrow is National Coming Out Day, and wouldn't it be wonderful if we could celebrate that with a radical welcome that's informed by the spirit of justice? I leave you with that. Thank you.